if Kellogg's were to make, like, if we were to enforce some of these changes on Kellogg's
Yeah.
and other companies, we could see some of these outcomes start to reverse. And that could just be a gateway to so many more things that could change in the food system over, a long period of time. How long do you think that it could take to get some of this stuff like actionable into a bill?
So what I said at the panel, which I think is really important for your listeners, is there's two aspects to this that I think will help us get dramatically healthier. The first aspect is what I call top down, which is from regulation. That by working with governments for things like what goes into our food supply, if they banned all these chemicals the way Europe and all these other developed countries do, or require these very strict warning labels, which would make companies not want to use them, if they did that, then these companies wouldn't have a financial incentive to use them because they can't. Right now, they can. And when they're debating like, hey, how do we increase our margins by a few percentage points? We could use this natural ingredient, or we could use this chemical synthetic ingredient, which is deemed safe in the US, and it'll give us a few, pennies extra per box. We have to remove the financial incentive for these companies because their incentive currently is just to maximize bottom line. That's the top down. Unfortunately, I think it takes a long time. And we have way too much bureaucracy. A lot of these things are way too politicized, and they shouldn't be. And I want to come back to the whole Republican versus Democrat issue for this. It should not, this human health and poisoning our citizens should not be a partisan issue. And unfortunately, it has been one. The much faster way, which I talk about at the end of the panel, is what I call bottom up, which is consumers voting with their wallets. And what I said to the group on the panel is that consumers have far more power with their wallets than we realize. And that all of these big public food companies, and I know this because I've studied them, I used to invest and short them and trade them and everything like that. All these giant food companies are very low growth companies, but they grow. And it's a whole nother story about how they consistently grow, but they grow. And they're very sensitive to not growing. And they will react very quickly if consumers stop buying their stuff. And so what I had said as kind of a plea to the crowd, and I said, I'm hoping that some very high profile celebrities with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of followers are listening to this. Because if you have some extremely influential people come out on Twitter, on Instagram, on whatever social media platform and say, hey, this is outrageous what Kellogg's is doing by selling an inferior, more toxic version in the US. I'm telling everyone who's following me, do not buy Kellogg's cereal until they change to use the safer, cleaner ingredients that are in Europe. And you could engineer, just from a boycotting, a 5% drop in quarterly sales. Kellogg's would change their formulation overnight. Overnight. I mean, you probably remember what happened with Bud Light with that issue.
Oh, yeah.
And granted, that was a different issue, and that's a political issue, but their sales dropped 20% from that. And it was like an apocalypse at that company when that happened.
Mm.
And so I want to figure out ways in which consumers can band together and share factual information. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is facts. And I want to figure out ways where consumers can share factual information and basically start boycotting as groups. Because if consumers don't buy it and they start rewarding companies who are doing it right, and yes, it does cost a little bit more money to do it right. And we should talk about that as a second point. But the bottom up part can happen fast. And what I'll tell you about Kellogg, and this is really exciting, at the end of Vonnie's testimony. So Vonnie and I, when I wrote my letter, Vonnie had set up, like a few years earlier, actually, a petition for any American to put their signature on it. It's 10 seconds, and I encourage all of your listeners to do this. It's 10 seconds. You literally just put your name on it. that basically says to Kellogg what I have told you, which is we don't want these artificial food dyes and these banned chemicals in our food here. We now have about 150,000 signatures on this petition. On October 15th, and Vani declared this publicly, so this is like Kellogg's knows this is coming. On October 15th, Vani and I are going to Battle Creek, Michigan, to the headquarters of Kellogg's. And there are hundreds of people who have already signed up. It might be thousands at this point, who are going to show up at the front door of Kellogg's headquarters with petitions in hand and effectively boycott them in person. And I'm very hopeful, if Kellogg's was even remotely intelligent about this, because this is going to be a horrible publicity event for them, I'm very hopeful that they come out before October 15th and say, okay, we heard you Americans. We know that you all want this change. Oh, and by the way, over the weekend, California just officially passed a bill where artificial food dyes are now banned in public schools in the whole state of California. And there are multiple states now that are evaluating doing the same because, again, the data is overwhelming that these things should not be in our food supply. And if you have a few more states that basically ban this stuff, Kellogg's will have but no choice but to change.
If we had the CEO of Kellogg's on the podcast, how do you think he or she would justify what they're doing to customers? Do you think they would just purely focus on keeping their jobs and shareholder profit? Or do you think that there's a degree of undertone of understanding what they're doing to customers?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what their letter said back to me. I mean, they were very, very careful in their legalese because this is a letter that I could obviously post online. They are hiding behind the fact that consumer preferences prefer the brighter colors in America. So they're claiming it's a preference thing because the kids prefer brighter colors. They will never admit publicly, but this is factual, that they make more money by using artificial food dyes than by using natural fruit colorants. So he doesn't really have a leg to stand on. There's literally no counter argument other than this is what's maximizing shareholder return. And it will cost them some money to alter their production capabilities to meet the amount of demand that they're doing in the U.S. to do what they're already doing in Canada and these other countries. The beauty of this and why Vani and I picked on it is because they're already making it. They already have the recipe. They already make it. So they just have to basically just change the recipe to what they already know works. It's really silly. Yeah. It's really insane. Like the fact that this is even a discussion is insane. And the fact that we needed to have a congressional Senate panel to debate whether we should poison our own people or not is so fucking insane that that's even a discussion.
The theme of your talk was like, just let's use our brains here.
Yeah.
Common sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if you were like an alien race looking down on us and watching this, and you were looking at all of our health metrics, and by the way, we're literally extincting ourselves. The part that I didn't mention at the beginning, which Casey and Callie talk about, are the fertility rates. I mean, men's sperm count's down 50% in 40 years. And women, the leading cause of infertility in women is polycystic ovary syndrome. And it's up to 26% of women now. I mean, it's not even like disputable that we are extincting ourselves. And it's just that we're the frog in the boiling pot and it's slow. So, and it is, look, it's very inconvenient and it's annoying. And, you know, a lot of the commentary that came out of the panel, which if you watch the last woman, whose name's Alex Clark, she was very animated and very angry, you know, about how hard it is for moms. It's really hard for everybody to live like this because you can't trust anything. You can't trust the tap water. You can't trust the food in grocery stores. You can't trust any of the products you buy in pharmacies. It's very hard to live because you have to look at every ingredient label. You have to ask all these questions like who made this? Where's it from? What's their agenda? It's exhausting. And nobody wants to have to think about that stuff. It's just so much easier to just like pull up to a drive-through, order it, not look what's in it, shove it in your mouth, go on your way, because everyone's busy. Everyone, everyone has families, everyone has jobs. I'm very sympathetic to how hard regular life is. So this is one of those things where the big food and big pharma and big chem and all the big industries, they rely on the fact that we are so enslaved as humans. We are enslaved with our day-to-day bullshit. We are enslaved with how much time we spend on our computers and our smartphones. We are enslaved where we're not asking questions. And they rely on the fact that we don't have time to ask these questions. And we don't have time to change our behaviors. And so every year that goes by, we get sicker and sicker because we are that frog in the boiling pot.